Good evening and welcome to 50 Days, the American election. With less than 50 days to go until the US presidential election, I'm Jess Blissett.
And I'm Ben Cook. During this week's episode of 50 Days, I'll be sitting down with Manuel Hernandez Perez to discuss his research into political narratives across the entertainment industry.
After that, our foreign correspondent, Carolyn, will be discussing how the US's involvement with global conflicts will influence domestic voters from coast to coast.
We'll also be looking at an interview I did earlier this week where I spoke to Gregor Sharp, representative for Democrats Overseas UK.
Then Claudia will be taking us through the historical and socio-economic roots of urban-rural polarisation in US voters.
But for now, we turn to our statistical correspondent, Rosaline Taita-Hearn, who will be taking a closer look at Georgia's recent performance as a swing state in the previous election, after being a Republican stronghold for many years. Over to you, Rosa.
Thanks, Ben. So, time is ticking on, and from today we have 26 days until the election. First, like usual, I want to update you on the general poll. So, this is a 538 poll. It's pretty much the same as last week, not a whole lot of change. Kamala's slightly ahead, but we're still within a margin of error. Trump could still pull this around, and I want to take a look this week at the states which will be essential to him doing that. So last week I did a little dive into Pennsylvania, which at the moment is showing a very minuscule preference towards Kamala Harris. However, if Trump managed to turn it, if he pulled forth the senior vote, if he turned the Puerto Rican vote and really hammered the economy, then he would be on his path to victory. So, in order to win, Trump would need two more swing states alongside Pennsylvania. He would need Georgia and potentially North Carolina. So today, I'm going to focus on one of these states and what's going on there electorally. So first up is Georgia. Georgia has varied over the past couple of centuries. From the late 1800s to 1960, it voted for the Democrats in every election. However, from 1964 onwards, its voters chose Republican candidates in all but 5 contests, with Biden's win in 2020 being among the exceptions. So how did the Democrats turn it around last election? A huge key was the ethnic minority vote, specifically African Americans. So I've got a couple of graphics for you here just showing how vital this demographic can be. So whilst white people are not a minority in Georgia, it's still very marginal. Non-white people make up a huge part of the electorate, and the demographics, particularly in these big cities, high population areas, have been changing over the last few decades. And then over here on the other side, we can see just how much the African American vote had an impact on the election last time. So these are counties specifically within Atlanta's metro area which voted for Biden, and the change between then and 2016. As you can see, the black voters are massively more significant than the white voters. And in fact, you can see here more than 136,000 new black voters showed up in 2020, over 44,000 more than new white voters. So it's generally agreed that this is what turned the state away from Trump. But it's also been agreed that the person who achieved this was not necessarily Biden. It was this woman, Stacey Abrams. So, Abrams was credited by the New York Times and other publications after the 2020 election for leading a vital, strong, grassroots campaign in Georgia on behalf of Biden and the Democrats. She was responsible for somewhere in the region of 800,000 new voter registrations. The question is, can the Democrats pull this off again? And in fact, Biden was on very shaky ground before he withdrew from the race. He was polling quite poorly with African American voters. The switch does seem to have paid off, however. As you can see on my next slide, Kamala has improved with a few demographics, but particularly black voters. So here you can see that little jump there between Biden and now Harris. However, if she can't rally enough people, Trump will gain this state, and in fact, he's already ahead. So, one more interesting thing to look out for in Georgia is the way that they are voting this year. Very recently, bills have been passed in Georgia as a result of the 2020 election. A huge part of Trump's post-election rhetoric has been surrounding the idea that the election was stolen from him. This anger focused in particular in Georgia, where Biden only had a very, very slim majority. Trump supporters have blamed many people, but they've also blamed the process, particularly mail-in ballots and electronic voting machines, which are used throughout America. As a result, Republicans have pushed for hand counts in Georgia. And to an extent, they've largely succeeded. So we'll have to see whether this has an impact at all in favour of Republicans or Democrats. But one thing is for sure, it will have an impact. As you can see on this next slide, most of the country uses electronic voting. There are very, very few that use hand-counted paper, just a few tiny little sections of states. Hand counts require infrastructure in place. They can be unreliable. Importantly, they can lead to intimidation. A machine can't be shouted at. Hand count workers could potentially be at risk. And in a time of such polarisation and anger in the country, it would be a very sad thing to see people being threatened. So it's a very complicated state, many people seeking to use it for victory, and as is often the case, the citizens here risk getting caught in the middle of the fight. So we'll keep an eye in the coming weeks, and next week I'll cover what could be Trump's final stepping stone to victory, North Carolina. So back to you, Ben.
Rural communities have often maintained traditional values and lifestyles, while urban areas embraced modernity and innovation. This divide would continue to shape societies for centuries to come, influencing politics, economics, and social relations. Rural voters tend to be more conservative, while urban voters are more likely to be liberal. This polarisation can have a significant impact on policy decisions and governance, as it can make it difficult to find common ground and address the challenges faced by both rural and urban communities. Civil War beginning in the 1870s, the Industrial Revolution was a period of rapid technological and economic growth, which significantly reshaped societies not just in the US but also worldwide. One of its most profound impacts was the acceleration of urbanization, which led to a stark divide between rural and urban areas. This geographic divide is often quoted as being behind putting Democratic votes, mainly living in cities, against rural Republicans, affecting both policy-making and representation. The emergence of places like factories and manufacturing industries created a huge increase in demand for labour, attracting people from rural areas to seeking economic opportunities and better livelihoods in larger cities, with the promise of higher wages and more stable employment pulled them away from the land. These new technologies, including steam power and improved transportation systems, made it so much easier for people to move to cities. Railroads and steamships assisted the movement of workers and goods, connecting rural areas to urban centres. The Industrial Revolution spurred economic growth, creating a demand for goods and services that could only be met in urban environments. Many rural residents found no alternative but to abandon their traditional way of life and seek employment in urban centres. This transition created a stark contrast between the two types of communities. Cities became hubs of commerce, trade, and innovation, attracting entrepreneurs and investors. The allure of urban life also helped encourage this movement. Rural communities that had often relied on agriculture for their livelihoods now experienced economic hardship, population decline, and limited access to services, as more and more farming practices became mechanised and much less labour-intensive. Then, to make matters worse, the Great Depression came. This severe economic downturn lasted until the late 1930s and had a profound impact on the rural divide in the United States. The Depression led to a sharp decline in agricultural prices, making it difficult for farmers to earn a living. Rural areas were disproportionately affected by the economic hardship, as the rural economy was heavily dependent on agriculture and lacked alternative resources of income. The Dust Bowl was a severe drought that plagued the Great Plains region in the 1930s, exacerbating the economic hardship. The drought caused widespread crop failures and forced many farmers to abandon their land. As these areas often had limited access to essential services, these limitations became even more pronounced as government resources were stretched thin. In response to the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt launched what is called the New Deal. This was a series of government programs aimed at providing relief, recovery, and reform to these communities. And whilst the New Deal did help to alleviate some of the suffering caused by the Great Depression, it also had mixed effects on the rural-urban divide. One of the most significant New Deal programs for the rural areas was the Rural Electrification Administration, or the REA, which provided loans to cooperatives to bring electricity to rural communities. This helped to improve the quality of life in rural areas and provided opportunities for economic development. However, some critics have argued that the New Deal favoured urban areas over rural communities, as many of the programmes were designed to address the specific needs of cities. Cities were also greatly affected by the Depression, with some, such as Toledo, Ohio, registering an unemployment rate of over 80%, and over 100,000 businesses shut down between 1929 and 1931. This largely contributed to the rise of unemployment. Today, according to the US Census Bureau, the median household income in rural areas is significantly lower than in urban areas. This disparity is driven by limited job opportunities, a dependence on agriculture, and a lack of infrastructure. Rural areas often have fewer job opportunities compared to urban areas, particularly in high-paying sectors such as technology, finance, and healthcare. This can lead to lower wages and higher unemployment rates, as many rural communities are also heavily dependent on agriculture. Volatile weather conditions and market fluctuations can make it difficult for residents to achieve economic stability. Rural schools may have fewer resources, outdated technology, and limited access to specialist programs. The digital divide can make it difficult for rural students to access online learning resources and participate in distance learning programs, as was particularly the case during the COVID-19 pandemic. These challenges can contribute to lower educational attainment among rural students, which can limit their future economic opportunities. Rural voters may feel marginalised by urban-centric policies, leading to a preference for candidates who promise to prioritise rural interests and economic development. Access to resources such as healthcare, education, and more can also affect voter turnout and preferences, as those with limited access to essential services may gravitate towards candidates who address these disparities. In urban areas, higher education levels often correlate with more liberal voting patterns. Those with degrees are more likely to prioritise issues like social justice, environmental policies, and healthcare reform. On the other hand, income inequality can create a divide where lower-income urban residents might lean towards populist candidates who promise economic reform and social support. Urban life promised entertainment, education, and social opportunities since the Industrial Revolution, and this also drew people to cities for many years. The concentration of people in urban areas created a vibrant cultural scene and many opportunities for employability and economic stability. The growing polarization between rural and urban areas can have negative consequences for American society. It can lead to a gridlock in Congress, a lack of trust in government institutions, and social unrest. Hopefully, they can find ways to bridge this divide and promote greater understanding and cooperation between people from all different areas of America.
Political polarisation refers to the increasing ideological distance and emotional hostility between political parties or groups. In highly polarised environments, individuals tend to hold more extreme views, and there is often a lack of willingness to compromise.
This can lead to greater division in society as people identify strongly with their political group and view opposing views with suspicion or hostility.
Since their Civil War, America has been the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, with very few independent candidates. Democrats have increasingly embraced left-leaning liberal policies, while Republicans have leaned towards more conservative stances.
Joining us today is Dr. Manuel Hernandez Perez, current lecturer in digital media here at the University of Salford and fellow at the United Kingdom's Higher Education Academy. He's known for his research in transnational political narratives within the Japanese entertainment industry and his focus in cultural studies regarding film and storytelling media. Hello Manuel, how are we today?
Oh, very good. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to the show.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for being here. So, just turning to your research paper, you speak on how American political narratives have transnationally influenced the Japanese entertainment industry. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, the idea of that paper was that political narratives could be a kind of genre, and as a kind of genre, what are the boundaries between what it is, transnational, what it is, the particular cultural industry of a country, like for example, Hollywood cinema, Bollywood, manga, which is Japanese comic books. Mm-hmm. So it was interesting to find examples of these kind of narratives, or what it is American politics in a context that it would surprise to some people that it seems to be foreigners, which is the Japanese comic books. So that's why I was just trying to extract the rules of the genre and see what can that tell us about formulaic narratives, which is a good example of these formulaic narratives would be the serial Japanese manga.
And is this a favourable portrayal of American political narratives, or can we see these portrayals perhaps being in the upcoming election, these influences in the upcoming election?
Well, one of the interesting points of the research is that despite some tropes to be universal and some tropes to be transnational, as it is the case of the American politics, as well you can observe many aspects structurally and thematically that refers exclusively to the Japanese, context of the Japanese, way of telling stories, and that's probably the most interesting thing about the thing. But I would say that for sure, fictionality is part of everyday politics. Storytelling has been used by the politicians since the beginning of times. Sometimes the politicians are part of that storytelling, and there is a trend in the last, I would say, 30-40 years of understanding all ways of communication, including political communication, as part of or a kind of subgenre within what it is storytelling.
And Manuel, a huge theme running throughout the United States now is the political polarization of the country. I mean, we have people on the extreme left, the extreme right, and we are dealing with a landscape that struggles to see any sort of common ground or middle ground. Do you think the media and social media plays into this political polarization that we're seeing? In social media, people only follow the accounts that sort of agree with them or that project their views. And do you think that we're in danger in the United States of people putting themselves too much into echo chambers, and that is really adding to the sort of polarization of the political landscape there?
Sure, totally agree. I mean, I think there is two different phenomena that are working in a parallel way. So certainly polarization has been something that is not unique or really idiosyncratic of the current ecosystem. Media ecosystem is not really something that new. It has happened always, But I would say that right now we have another factor working at the same time that it's maybe making this effect even more pernicious, and it's the concept of informational bubbles. The idea that we as individuals now we are empowered to choose who is telling us the stories every day. In the moment that we choose these communicators, in the moment that we choose this context of discussion, we are certainly already filtering ourselves much of the information that we are receiving, and in that sense we are contributing to that misinformation.
And speaking of individualism, how do you think social identity, i.e. race, religion or geographic location, intersects with political polarization to shape voting behaviour in the United States?
I think certainly in the moment that you say someone is choosing those informational bubbles, someone is choosing to support this candidate or to contribute to the speeches in relation to or against a candidate, you are talking about identity, because identity, part of what identity is obviously our values and also our narratives, like I am, supported of X or Y person, therefore I am X or Y in terms of values, in terms of beliefs, in terms of even, personal or, even physical, attributes sometimes. So some people contribute to, what it could be somehow an stereotyping of the audience. We are also diverse and unique, and we should be critical. I think the key of that is that unless we create a society that is more politically, is increasing in their political literacy, and we increase their critical thinking, and their ability to compare equally candidates, using contextual information, but also as I say, most important, critical thinking. I think that is what is missing, and that's why it's so dangerous right now. This kind of dynamics of information and misinformation in a society like this one.
Something you touched on there, Manuel, is about the society that you believe that we need to create in America. Obviously, the way that the presidential race is looking now, it's extremely neck and neck. I mean, we're not going to see any sort of landslide win from this. So whoever the next president is, whether it is Trump or Harris, they are going to have a huge job on their hands, essentially trying to appeal to half of the country that is clearly disconnecting from them. We know that, people in sort of more coastal and city areas are more worried about transport, the environment. They lean to the left. And then we have a lot of people in rural areas who are more concerned with issues such as gun rights and smaller governments. How do you think that the next candidate can bridge these gaps? If Kamala Harris, she is currently in the lead, if she does end up winning the presidential election, how is she going to connect to people in, the deep south rural areas, that are real red places?
I mean, we are obviously in two different scenarios here, no? If Kamala Harris achieves the presidency, or it is, another presidential, stage for Donald Trump. I think in both cases, obviously, there will be challenges, and I think maybe we will be necessarily being very aware of how Kamala Harris will be continuing some narratives related to the Democratic Party, and I think for what I've been exploring myself only, as a British citizen, not really as obviously I'm not voting in the United States. Is that the team behind Kamala Harris is the same team basically, and the same stakeholders that were supporting Obama. So obviously I can imagine a continuation of those narratives, and there will be still resistance for half of the country. Part of the lights and also shadows of the American political system is precisely this very strong bipartisan. A society that is right now not being, governed by the political candidate that they choose, is not necessarily an unhappy society, and it's not necessarily, a society that is not working. That kind of dissidence, it's just a consequence of the democratic system, which we know is, the less, damaging of all the systems, is the best we know so far. So I think society will survive that dissonance, but I can imagine that because right now we are more empowered to complain and to express our opinion as citizens, there will be more resistance through the media, and there will be more pressure, but the politics will be work exactly as they were before. I don't think it's going to be a radical change in that sense.
Well, Manuel, thank you very much for joining us today and giving us that sort of unique angle on how the media is influencing polarisation in America, which we're seeing today. And I suppose the only way that we're going to find out to see how things pan out is to wait and see. And we'll have more of an idea of who the next president is going to be November the 5th.
November 5th. Thank you very much for being here, Manuel.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Gregor, thank you very much for joining us. I just want to start by asking you a little bit about who the Democrats Abroad UK are, what your role within that, and what the aim of your mission is.
Okay, so Democrats Abroad is the international arm of the US Democratic Party, and Democrats Abroad UK is obviously the UK chapter of Democrats Abroad. And then my involvement within Democrats Abroad UK is that I am specifically the student director for Scotland. So I help oversee voter registration, voter access, and voter assistance for all US students who are studying abroad or studying internationally at Scottish universities and institutions.
Amazing. And Gregor, we are just a matter of weeks away from the all-important US presidential election, which is going to be
Yes.
on November the 3rd.
Less than a month. Yeah.
Less than a month. And the latest polls show that Kamala is at 48.5%, Trump is at 45.7%. Kamala is winning the race so far, and we are the closest we've ever been to seeing the first female president of the United
Mhm.
States. She has maintained the lead over Donald Trump ever since Joe Biden withdrew from the race and endorsed her as the Democratic nominee. However, the margins are extremely slim, and it wouldn't take much for Donald Trump to outtake Harris. I mean, we're not going to see any landslide in this election whatsoever. In terms of the economy, Trump has retained a persistent polling advantage on the economy over the Democrats. He wants to end inflation and make America affordable again. And whether you
Oh, his
agree or
economic
disagree with
policy is very
this,
similar.
he has an extremely clear stance on immigration, and he wants to conduct one of the biggest mass deportations in American history. Do you think that
Mhm.
in terms of taking issues such as the economy and immigration, the American people have a level of distrust in Kamala Harris to get the job done, and she could ultimately lose the presidency over matters such as the economy and immigration?
Ultimately, I don't think that whatsoever. I actually do think that Trump's current economic policies would actually be worse for the US economy, especially when it comes to the raising of tariffs. Donald Trump wants to raise all imported goods like tariff rates by like about 20%. And that can ultimately lead to just standard prices for basically everything dramatically increasing. However, with Kamala Harris's economic policies, she wants to provide more a more stable economy to first-time homeowners with a $25,000 deposit, as well as $6,500 for first-time families, and so much else in general, including price caps on medication and that kind of stuff as well. But so ultimately, I do not believe that Kamala's current stances on immigration and economics in general will actually cost her the election.
And let's go to the swing states, the all important swing states. And in terms
Mm,
of the 2024 swing states, we have Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada.
yes.
Both parties are essentially neck and neck in Pennsylvania. Georgia
Mm,
looks to be sliding over to the left, so a win for Kamala. A handful of pollsters are finding that she's also in the lead for North Carolina, and she's
mhm.
edging ahead in Michigan and Wisconsin. But Trump is expected to take the lead in Arizona and Nevada. How
Yes.
confident are you, Gregor, that the majority of the swing states will ultimately swing to the left in favor of the
Mm.
Democrats?
Ultimately, I do believe that Donald Trump will not win Michigan and Wisconsin due to the failures that he had on his economic plans when he originally ran in 2016. Donald Trump originally stated that he wanted to bring back the oh my gosh, what's it called? The word for it. Oh my God, I'm blanking. Um, the mechanical jobs, just the manufacturing jobs in Wisconsin and Michigan, which have been failing since the 2008 economic crisis. And because of his failures to do so, he lost both of those states in the 2020 election, and it's most likely that he's going to continue to lose those states in the 2024 and election as well. With Pennsylvania, it's neck and neck, so I can't really say anything on that. But I do believe with the increase in voter registration within both the states of North Carolina and Georgia, and with the recent hurricanes that have affected North Carolina and the actions of what the current administration has done to help support those communities that have been absolutely wiped out, has ultimately led to both North Carolina and Georgia swinging more left in a sense. And then ultimately, I do believe that hopefully, with the economic plans that Kamala Harris does and the continued, I wouldn't say propaganda, but like continued show to support the Pennsylvanian economy, I do ultimately believe that the state will ultimately land towards Kamala Harris. However, with Arizona and Nevada as well, it's kind of like a toss up for that as well. Because again, the polling in 2020 showed that Arizona was going to go for Donald Trump. However, it ultimately didn't. And ultimately, that was because of actually voters internationally mailing in their ballots. in 2020. And because there's been such a significant increase in international voting, especially mostly amongst like Democrats abroad and vote from abroad, I can likely see that kind of sticking to the 2020 plan.
And Gregor, do you think that there's a real problem in the state now with political polarization? There's so many people too far to the left,
Mhm.
so many people too far to the right. Do you think that they're sort of missing that middle ground?
Yes, absolutely, I do. Just based on social media alone, you can very definitely you can see the divisible line within politics within the United States. Practically every single issue that's possibly out there is kind of split into two, just on the simple basis, even though most of the American population clearly supports one side over the other. It's just there's a very loud minority. But yeah, political polarization has really affected America in the past decade or so, mostly due to the unmoderation of social media and other forms of speech. And that's ultimately costed a lot when it comes to politics in general, because there really isn't a middle ground to like, kind of work together anymore, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, Gregor, you touch on social media being a reason for that polarization. Also, I
Mhm.
think the fact that there's a two-party state, I don't think that
Yes.
also
Yeah.
helps. But given America's
Mhm.
vast landscape, geography does have a huge part to play in terms of the political polarization of the country. I mean, there's divides between rural and urban areas.
Mhm.
The voters in each area, the divide is growing, grows everywhere.
Yes.
Um,
Mhm.
recent research I was looking at into geographic polarization found that a striking correlation between population density and voting behaviour that grows stronger with each election. And there are
Mhm.
fears that the Democrats are becoming an exclusively urban party. I mean, New York wins. It's been a strong blue seat
Yeah.
forever, hasn't it? That's just one example.
Exactly.
Um,
It's like Illinois as well with Chicago. Chicago kind of controls the entire state politics for Illinois.
Yeah. And if Kamala Harris is the next president of the United States, which is looking quite likely, how do you think she'll work to bridge this gap and provide representation for rural Americans who clearly aren't resonating with the Democratic government right now?
Yeah. Ultimately, I can really say that we can kind of see what Kamala Harris kind of wants in the future for rural America based on her current plans for not council positions. Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank on the names. That's really bad of me. Um, oh my gosh. Okay, hold on. Let me repeat this. Sorry, this is my bad. Um, but yeah, ultimately, I do believe that Kamala Harris does have rural voters in mind. I mean, especially on her recent tours, she's actually gone and visited a lot of rural communities, spoken to small businesses there. She's specifically mentioned in her campaign that she wants to continue supporting small businesses, and most small businesses are in fact in suburban and rural areas rather than in urban areas. And ultimately, I do believe her commitment to small business, supporting small businesses, as well as actually getting her information and resources from local politicians in those areas as well, ultimately kind of does show that she does care about the rural environment just as much as she would the urban environments in America as well.
And Gregor, I just want to talk a little bit about where America is standing in terms of geopolitics on the world stage right now. And in terms of Russia and Ukraine, the issue for the American voter is whether the United States should continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. That is something that the Biden
Mhm.
administration is very strong on right now, and Kamala is committed to continuing if
Mhm.
she does take over the presidency. But do you think
Yes.
it is in the US national interest to pour so much money into supporting Ukraine?
Yes. Ukraine is an ally to the United States, and it's a very vital ally as well. And it was very disconcerting when I was watching the presidential debate to hear Trump not state anything about like supporting the Ukraine in future endeavors, especially when it's such a strong ally, and it kind of is like a buffer state in between Russia and our allies in general. So yeah, it's very concerning to see one Donald Trump not really say like not really endorse and support the Ukraine and actually side with Russia over supporting our allies, which Kamala continues to endorse in a sense. Wow, my tongue is just locking up.
And Gregor, just before I let you go, I want to
Yeah.
ask you what your predictions for the election are. What can you see happening?
Ultimately Kamala Harris is going to win the popular vote, just as Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden did against Donald Trump. But with a state-by-state cases, I do believe Wisconsin and Michigan are definitely going to go blue. Pennsylvania, I do have high hopes for, and ultimately, I do think that Georgia, North Carolina are going to tilt blue, kind of by the similar proportions that they did in the 2020 election. Uh, Nevada is a very strong case where I'm like, Las Vegas could definitely win it for Kamala, and then Arizona is just as much of a toss-up as it is usually. So I just have very high hopes that student turnout is high, youth turnout is high, and ultimately just the kind of turnout that the US needs to continue progressing in society.
And Gregor, very last thing, just because it popped into my head. What do you think if Kamala doesn't win, what do you think another Trump presidency would mean and look like in America?
What I would see with another Donald Trump presidency is definitely the removal a lot of minority rights and protections, especially amongst those of women, of course, with bodily autonomy. I don't see that continuing to exist in the United States. As well as gay marriage, because I know the conservative court, Supreme Court has called a couple court justices have called for the overturning of Obergefell versus Hodges, and that also includes interracial marriage, which I'm like, yikes. Um, so yeah, ultimately, I do believe that minority protections aren't gonna last long under a Trump presidency. And also, I don't, he's going to go hard against unions and that kind of stuff. So it's all a bit yikes to me. I'm very concerned if there would be another Trump presidency. I'm very concerned for the rights and safety of not only me, but my friends and my community.
And do you believe that Kamala Harris is the woman for the job? Can she take America forward?
I mean, considering what we've seen so far, abso-fucking-lutely. Oh, I can't swear. Sorry. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Amazing. Gregor, thank you very much for your time and for joining us here on 50
Mhm.
Days. That was brilliant. That is Gregor Shaw from Democrats Abroad UK.
Mhm. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's all we have time for today. But Jess, wasn't it a good episode today?
Oh, it absolutely was, Ben. And exactly how many days is it now until the US presidential election?
We have 25.
Oh, that's lots to think about. From all of us here at 50 Days, we hope you enjoyed today's show. I'm Jess Blissett.
And I'm Ben Cook. Thank you and good night.